Hello, today we are here to rank the American tanks in War Thunder of the World War II era. So that mostly covers ranks 1 through 4, with a couple in rank 5, about to the 7.0 BR. With me here today is my friend Joe, who will be assisting me in giving
Hello,
his
everyone.
opinions. So we're going to dive right into it. These are arranged in alphabetical order, and we'll get started. So the first tank on the list here is the Sherman M4 Calliope. Sits at a battle rating of 4.0, and besides being pretty much a standard M4 Sherman, it has a bunch of rockets mounted on the top. Now, I think this tank is, while it is one of my favorite tanks historically, it is mostly a gimmick, even a gimmick on an M4. So I think it's probably middle of the pack, maybe a little lower, because the rockets are a bit of a liability. Even if you can get some kills, I've killed Panthers from the front with them before, so it is possible to use them, but I think for the most part, it's kind of, mostly a joke that you would bring in. What do you think?
I tend to agree. The rockets, I mean, War Thunder's opinion on whether the rockets exploding kills the tank kind of changes patch through patch, in my experience. But overall, it genuinely, it's just a Sherman with some extra boom on top and given a bit more BR because of it. I like it again, like you said. I like the tank historically. It's a great idea. Just more rocket on a tank. There's nothing wrong with that. But in game, yeah, it doesn't perform any better or worse than a comparable
So I'm
Sherman
thinking
would.
we put this in the C tier, maybe. It's got all
That's
the
fine.
strengths of a Sherman, but it's just not something I
Yeah,
would really want to bring if I was looking to do super well.
yeah. It's got all the strengths of the Sherman plus one minus one. Like
Yeah.
you've got rockets, but you also explode. So
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up is the Cobra King, which is a reskin of the M4 Jumbo. And much like the Jumbo, which we'll sort of get into later, but I guess we can talk about it now, sits at 5.3 BR and is incredibly, incredibly powerful, even after the nerfs it's had, since its heyday in 4.7. So I really have to say this is probably the first S rank tank right off the bat, just because the Jumbo is just incredibly strong.
yeah, I can't say I disagree. I used to have to fight that thing when it was 4.7, and it was pretty terrifying back then. At 5.3, I mean, sure, it's the same BR as Tigers and technically higher than a Panther variant nowadays. Doesn't matter. does not make
Its
a
armor
difference.
is
Still a jumbo.
pretty much impenetrable to anything short of I think the L42 75 millimeter, the one on the Panther. You
Yes,
can
the Panther.
certainly bounce Tiger 1 shells from it if you know how to play it.
Mhm.
And you can also kill them if you use the APCR through the front plate. So
Yeah,
its gun thankfully has APCR, and it's damn hard to kill. So I think it's an S rank tank. I've never had a
yeah.
bad game playing this.
Good armor, decent mobility, 50 cal, stabilized 75 of APCR. I mean, it says it all, really.
Okay, next up is the LVT A1. It's a reserve tank. It's the landing vehicle tracked with the little 37 millimeter gun on it. Used in the Pacific, a little historical background, but in War Thunder it is amphibious, and it does have the two tail gunners, for lack of a better term, on it. It's pretty damn survivable simply because of how much empty space is in it. So for that reason, it's quite fun. It's zippy, but I don't think it really stands out in any way.
Yeah, like a lot of the bigger tanks at the low ratings, it survives purely by just having lots of space and crew to sacrifice. So it's not well armored. It's a massive target. It is a lot. It's remarkably mobile for the sheer size of it. The 37mm, plenty good gun, but it's not special. Everything American has it at that BR.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's fun, but not necessarily effective.
I'm thinking this maybe also goes in the C tier.
That's
Only
reasonable.
because I know that the US has a lot of like really good across the board tanks, so I don't want to fill up B quite so quick. After that is its cousin, the LVTA4, sits a little bit higher at 1.3, and it has the short 75 howitzer on it. That's also on another tank we'll get to later, the M8 Scott. This thing I like much less than the LVT-A1 because its turret traverse is pretty atrocious, and it is
Mm.
open top in the important place and not on the unimportant place. So you're a little more vulnerable to planes. You got the howitzer around with the heat shell, but I don't know. You can't really take advantage of like a small size to sort of make up for the slow turret. So I think it's probably worse than the LVTA one.
I agree. It's like, sure, you get all the extra, like, well, I say extra firepower. You get the extra boom, but you pay for it in turret traverse. You pay for it in, being vulnerable to plane strafes. And to be honest, you don't really need the extra firepower at 1.3. The 37 is entirely capable of killing anything you'll see at that BR. So
Except
trading in
maybe
turret.
that little fucking T126. I hate that thing.
Oh yeah, but T126. That's the same BR as the
That's like the T34.
T50. Yeah, it's the same BR as the T50, so that's 2.7. You
Yeah,
shouldn't see it in theory.
True. It's just a low tier. Anyways, I digress. Yeah. This thing's probably D tier. I don't have fun playing it. I think it's not good.
That's fair. Speaking of D tier.
M2A2. I think you might be a little harsh calling it D tier, even though I do agree. It has only a 50 cal and a 30 cal in the twin turrets, but it is very fast, and you do get access to the AP belts, which no other 50 cal does.
That was a saving grace, because it never used to, and by God, it was terrible.
Did it really not? It must have been like years ago.
Oh, this is years ago, before belts were really a thing. I mean, there were still obviously the APCR for the Panzer II and stuff, but they hadn't had that much like depth put into them, so they were kind of just a couple more or less pen. And yeah, it didn't have. It had the same AP as the plain AP, which isn't like exceptional.
Yeah, so this thing has AP belts, but it is still only a 50 cal. I love it conceptually, but I don't think I'd ever want to play it.
Yeah, it's the same reason why one of the tanks I want in the game I know probably won't be added, because it would be comparable to this in terms of stats, and that just means Gaijin has no interest.
Not at all. Okay, next up is the M2A4 First Armored, and we'll lump its tech tree cousin in as well. So the M2A4 and its reskin, both at 1.0/reserve. It's got an unstabilized 37, I believe, and a bunch of machine guns. This is, I think, probably the first, all-around average tank. It is a light tank with a decent gun, and it's decently fast, and it has a little bit of armor on it. So I really can't say that it's, bad or good for its BR.
Yeah, can't really argue with that. It is, if you had to point to like a good starter tank in the game for someone who's never played before, that's a decent choice. You have a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I would definitely play it over, for instance, like the German starter tanks. I don't think the Panzer III and Panzer IV are very good, like, to introduce you to kind of some of the fundamental concepts, just because they're a little slow and a little fat for reserve.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the first kind of average tank. Speaking of average, the M2 medium, right after it at 1.3 BR. Again, I love it because it has so many machine guns on it, and I have gotten kills with like the rear ones in kind of unorthodox ways. Nevertheless, I don't think it's exceptional in any way. The armor kind of helps it because it's a little higher. So I think I'd also put this in B. It's really kind of just an average tank in the most average of ways.
I'd say it's lower B than the Stuart, but yeah, I can't really argue with that one. It really is just interwar medium syndrome of kind of just.
One of the downsides it does have, I think, is that its turret traverse if memory serves, it's pretty bad. I think worse than the
It's
M2s.
worse than the. Yeah, it's definitely worse than the M2s. I think probably a bit worse than the Stuart as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is massive target. Like for its BR at least.
Okay, next up is the M3 GMC, which is the half-track with the 75mm field gun on it. This, despite, I think, how vulnerable it is really, really good, because that 75mm gun has an impressive amount of penetration on it for how low it is, sitting at 1.3, or 1.7, my mistake. So I would probably want to say it's A tier, just because it's, like, if you need a big gun to kill anything, like, you see a B1, gone, if you shoot it with that thing.
Yeah, I was worried that we were going to have, like, the first proper disagreement there, but no, yeah, that's absolutely A tier. Any of the kind of, I mean, obviously, it's a half-track, machine gun fire is dangerous, anything, splash damage is dangerous, everything, but the sheer amount of firepower they bring. Same for the what's it called, the Su-57 half track that the Russians get, and to a lesser extent something like, say, the Archer for Britain. It's like they're very vulnerable, but the amount of firepower they bring at their BR is just so exceptional. You
They're
can't really
can
say that
openers.
they're not bad. Yeah, with a
So
little bit of caution, they can be incredibly deadly.
definitely. Next up, we'll do these together as well. Actually, no, we'll talk about it separately. The
I think
M3 Grant and the M3 Lee. We'll do the Lee first, I think, because it's the tech tree version.
Go for it.
M3 Lee, really good tank, but it is clunky to play. So it's got the 37 mil on top in the turret, and it's got the casemate 75, the kind of the early 75. So if you know how to play it well, you can be a real deadly mobile kind of bunker, but it is difficult to make use of all parts of it at the same time, specifically the 75. So I think it's probably maybe I hate putting it at C tier, but like
I would argue for at least a B. I mean, there's the old, like, different game, old World of Tanks meme about how terrible it is, but in War Thunder I don't think I've ever had a truly bad game playing, well, the Grant specifically for me, but you know, that tank in general is just, you can surprise people with a 75. Like, sometimes they'll hit you in the hull, kill you 75. That's fine.
Yeah, I
You've
guess
got
people
37
at that
halfway around.
rank do tend to be a little less aware that you can kind of fire independently. So,
and it's yet another example of a tank at that BL that can actually deal with things like the B1. That 75 is entirely capable of punching right through the front, and it will probably one-shot it because, well, it's essentially, it's more or less a Sherman gun. It's not quite as good, but it performs in almost the same way.
Yeah, all right, we'll put it at B. We'll put it in the low B, because I want to get onto the Grant, which is, I think, better.
Yes, I would agree.
Pretty much just an objective upgrade. That it loses the extra 30 cal at the top, which you barely use anyway because it's not a 50 cal, so who cares? And the turret is just like so much better.
Yeah, it's a better turret with thicker armor on it. So if you can ever find a position to hold down in that tank, it's quite hard. It's quite tall, but if you can do it, it's relatively safe. You don't have the cupola at the top, so you can hide a little bit better. Again, for for something as big as the Lee, that's
like,
yeah.
Tall.
You are
medium.
You can be seen from a, you know, you're slightly better at hiding. It used to back in the day, I believe, get more crew. I don't think it does anymore, which is a shame. But I can understand why.
I think they both have 6. I don't think they have all 7.
Yeah, the British, I think, used to have 7 because historically we put 7 men in ours just because there was space for them, I guess, and it you know, it leaves a spare man to do things. But I don't think that's in War Thunder.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, no, it's you trade. You literally just trade the turrets. That's the only difference. But
the only downside is it's like atrocious stock paint. I hate how it looks.
Oh,
that, like,
are you thinking
whatever?
specifically? Is that the British one specifically, or is the American one like that as well?
I don't know. I think the American one's got like the brown paint. Maybe I'm
yeah, it's
crazy.
the same paint that you end. It's the same paint you end up with on the KV-220. If anyone have seen a stock KV-220, it's just base paint. It's not even like camo paint. It's the stuff you put on the tank before you put the paint on. It's quite ugly.
Okay, so B's I think pretty fair. M3, we'll start with the M3. 1.7 BR, pretty much the first technically Stuart. It's got a bunch of machine guns on it. Pretty quick mobile. It's, you know, pretty much just an upgrade to the M2 while being slightly higher BR, so I think it tracks pretty well.
Yeah,
I don't really have much else to
say. Yeah, I would just say put it in the same place as the Stuarts because it's a little bit higher but a little bit better. It does the same thing, it does the same thing in the same way at a high BR.
Now, what do you think about the
M3A1?
It is at 2.3 BR as of the time of this recording, and then the only change, I think, is that it loses the machine guns and it might get a stabilizer. I forget if it gets a stabilizer, but I probably should have checked this.
That would have been worth checking because if it does get a stabilizer, that is a marked improvement.
I have a sneaking suspicion that I think it does. So the M3 might also have one, actually, now that I think about it.
I'd argue that if they got stabilizers, that might be worth an A rating because that makes
We'll
so
put the
massive a difference.
M3A1 in just because I think its armor's a little better too.
Okay, yeah,
So
that's
we'll
fair.
put the M3A1 in A because I think it has the stabilizer upgrade. I know it doesn't have the sap shell. I think only the M5 and the Locust get that. We'll talk about them later. So yeah, A tier for the M3A1. Okay, M4. Doing this in a little bit different order. It's the M475. M4A175.
Okay,
So this is the
W.
cast hull one, with kind of the early mantlet design. I have never been the biggest fan of this one, even though, well, yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of this one because its hull shape really kind of does it no favors, even if it does have the the same standard 75 that all the other Shermans have. It's got the 50 cal, of course, decently mobile, but yeah, I think kind of the bad hull shape I think maybe makes me want to put it at C tier.
Yeah, I would agree. In the infinite wisdom of Gaijin, there are very many of the cast hull Shermans in the game, and each one has a different armor layout for the casting at the front.
They do. We went over this like independently one day, just because it's so weird.
The one in question that we're talking about here has the cheeks be 38mm, so it's the side armor growing onto the front plate, whereas pretty much every other one in game is the 51mm casting around to the front of the side to the front of the sides. So it while it doesn't sound like it will make much difference, it can.
Most
it's
things
noticeable.
Continue in this thing.
Yeah,
You can't
angle, and it's got the bad mantlet, so that the front of the turret is still only 76mm at what 3.3 is this thing?
Yeah, it's at 3.3. Forgot to mention that.
The long German 75 is there. The Russians get various 76s. Like they can all kill you.
Probably fight 57 or something ridiculous. I'm sure.
Yeah, and a max up tier you can. Yeah. Hell, even at 2.7 they've.
I think of all the Shermans, that's probably one of the worst ones, just because it's so early. It's just got lots of bad features on it. I would not say the same, however, for its big brother, the M4A176. I think this is probably pound for pound the best 76 Sherman, simply because it's at the 4.7 BR.
Yes.
You do have the vulnerable hull, but that's kind of less of a problem because like none of the Sherman's hulls are like particularly amazing by then, compared to what they'll fight. So
yeah, I mean a weak hull, a bit 4.7 where you can fight,
like Panthers.
Yeah, Panzer IVs. If you get if
I don't think
even at 5.0 now, there's a Panther.
Besides the jumbos that can stand up to a Panther, so.
Yeah, and even the jumbo isn't guaranteed to resist it. If you angle it will, but like if it's straight on, it's a 60-40.
Yeah, so I think the M4 A176 is really, really good. It's got that
I
gun at 4.7, the filler, all the other advantages of a Sherman, stabilized. It's just great.
Yeah, the lower the 76 is, just the better, the more enjoyable it is. It really is. It's a great gun, but obviously the lower down you have it, the more bullying you can do.
Okay, moving on to the M4A275. This is kind of the last Sherman 75 in the game, because the M4A3 75 is not in the game. Very sad. But this tank is, I think it's probably one of the best encapsulations of just a Sherman. It's mobile, it's got a good front armored plate without the vulnerable, like, driver hatch things, whatever the heck they are. Got APCR. Yeah, I love it.
I'd honestly consider putting this one at A.
I'd take it, yeah.
It gets the 63mm front plate, so it's the best protected of the low Shermans. I'll call it a low Sherman. It's what 4.0, so it's not very low, but it's 4.0. It's not a 76. It gets the turret. While it doesn't seem special, I just have difficulties getting through it for whatever reason. That
mantlet design can be kind of tricky, even trickier than like the late Sherman mantlets, I think sometimes. Yeah,
it's just. Yeah, it's the kind of pinnacle of 75 Sherman so far in the game.
Yeah, so I think A is fair for it. Its brother, however, I don't think quite stacks up.
Is that the M48? 76?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the M4A
A2.
376 at a BR what is it? 5.3.
5.0 is it? 5.3.
5.3. Yeah, it got real bad.
Yeah.
Even so, it's basically the same thing as the M4A 176. It doesn't get the APCR yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's got like a slightly better front plate, but its mobility is almost the same. Its protection, firepower are identical. So, it's still a Sherman 76 though. It's stabilized, so I think I want to put it at B.
I think that's fair. The unfortunate BR rise is a bit of an issue over its, curvy.
I mean, if you
sibling.
think that's equivalent to a Panther D, that's your business, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I personally do like the tank in the games I've played in it. It does everything you would expect it to be able to do. You can flank, you can hold positions, whatever you need it to do, it will do. But that's just a kind of universal Sherman thing. They're very universally reliable. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's not exceptional in any real regard.
We'll jump to the M4A 376 as well while we're here. The EZ8. Despite being a marked increase in mobility, I think it's still probably only B tier simply because it also goes up to 5.7. Yeah, 5.7.
I believe 5.7. Yeah. Again, it's like you're in dangerously.
That's I think probably one of the most unfair BRs in the game.
Yeah, because everyone plays 6.7, so you're going to be seeing King Tigers a lot.
King Tigers, Yag Tigers, Elephants.
IS-2s, if you're getting against the Russians. T-44s, dear God.
Yeah, it's a super mobile Sherman with the same good gun, but you really are you're kind of stretching the limits of what you can do with a Sherman at that point. So
yeah, considering you're at the same battle rating as two versions of the Panther, and you're in fact you're higher than two versions of the Panther.
You're higher than the Tiger tanks, I think, as well.
You're higher than you're the same as the Tiger E. You're higher than the Tiger H1. You're higher than the Panther D, and you're higher than the VK 3002M.
Yeah, so
yeah,
it's a real rough B.
I feel like it deserves more than the B, not in game, just generally. Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately,
the EZ8 is a great tank, but alas.
All right, yeah, I know you've been wanting to talk about this next one, the M4A 3105. So why don't you take the lead on this one? Tell us about your experiences.
This tank, in a world where many other tanks have been raised in BR for considerably dubious reasons, this one has somehow made it through. This thing is an M4. It's an EZ8 hull, which means you get the 63mm front plate, you get the mobility. It's pretty solid. At 2.7, a 63mm sloped plate at a BR where things still have, let's say, the 2-pounder, the 5cm, what other examples?
The Soviet 45.
The 45mm. Yeah, exactly. It's just.
But it has
the only
bad
vehicles.
turret traverse.
Yeah, guys, it has a bad turret traverse.
Balanced.
Except the fact that the only tanks that have a gun that can kill it can usually be killed by its 50 cal anyway, which is conveniently got on top of it there. And it doesn't matter if you just sit hull down in a position, there is nothing the enemy team can do about you, unless you are just not paying attention. And while there's lots of people at 2.7 who are, not necessarily accustomed to how to play the game yet, that thing, if he's on a ridgeline looking at you, and there is no counter, 6-pounder. Fat chance.
It does
75
only
fat
have
chance.
a heat round and an HE, so you're not gonna have the APHE, but
yeah,
I will admit it is one of the most blatantly overpowered tanks for its BR.
Absolutely, it doesn't even matter if I believe I was facing this in the most recently in a Churchill Mark 1. Now that tank, sure, it's a bit undergunned. You get this 2-pounder 3.3. It's undergunned, whatever. But it's also incredibly well armed. And even if he was non-penning with, say, 3 of 4 rounds, that 4th round, when it does finally pen, it's killing you quicker than you're killing it, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Nope.
Yeah.
That thing's a heavy tank masquerading as a medium.
It is.
I've
fought them in Cromwell Mark 1s. I'm going on a flank. I'm going to sneak around the back of the team, do some damage, and I see one of those watching the flank from a ridgeline, and I could not pen it.
They're waiting.
I believe
like
out
clocks.
12 shots fired. I believe 1 penetrated and it lightly wounded the commander.
Oh, that's rough. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
that
that's an
thing
S tier
is
tank,
an S tier
simply
out
because
of.
it is so obnoxiously overpowered.
Yeah, I agree.
Speaking of overpowered, we'll throw the other jumbo up there
Yeah,
as well.
we don't really need to discuss that. It's the same without a skin.
It's the same as the
very
Cobra
good.
King. Incredibly good. Incredibly good. Okay, what's after him? M4A5, so that can...
The is that the M4A?
Wait, no, what?
I think that is that an M4A. No, what is that? Just the M4 standard?
Oh, it is. Yeah. I skipped one on my list. Never mind. M4 standard, 3.7 tank. It's got that really kind of weird front plate that a lot of the export Shermans have, where it has the 2 hatches on the front that are really easy to go through.
I would argue it's still a better hull than the rounded Sherman, though.
It is still a better hull. It's got the better mantlet as well, so it's a
That's
little harder
true.
to pen there. It's decently quick, but it's just kind of got a couple more downsides than the M4A2.
Yeah, it's slightly higher than the curvy Sherman, offering you a little bit more, but not really enough to make it.
It doesn't get 9 PCR, so it is the most average of averages of Shermans.
Yeah, it is the default Sherman. But yeah, a B is comfortable for that.
Okay, next up, M4A3E276. Now, as good as the Jumbo was, I think its cousin is not a lot worse, but I think it's in a worse spot. It's at 6.3 BR, so that's really rough. That's the same BR as a Pershing. And while its armor is better, I don't think it's like exceptionally better.
Is it better? I don't think
it's better
it
in
is.
some ways because it's a little less weird. There's kind of less strange spots on it. It's just kind of a flat plate.
Yeah. I must admit to not having recently compared the two, but as far as I was aware, historically in War Thunder at least, I thought that the hull and turret were essentially identical, and it was just the gun that changed. But I could be wrong about that. I don't know if you've looked more recently.
It's hard to say.
Either way,
the problem with the Pershing, and we'll talk about this later, is that it's kind of just got a weird armor scheme. There's places where it's really easy to pen it from the front, and that's kind of not the case with the Jumbo. It's pretty much if you could pen it, you can pen it anywhere frontally. It's more of a threshold than a skill thing.
Yeah, unless you can magically hit the machine gun port that won't be covered in any sort of decoration.
No, I've never seen a bush on the machine gun port. What?
No.
Are you crazy? Anyway. I think it is worse than the Jumbo. I think 6.3 is far too high. Not far too... I think it's too high of a BR for it. I think 6.0 is fine.
Yeah, purely because of its BR. When the Jumbos were in their golden phase, when they were at 4.7 and I think 5.7.
Yeah, they've always been about 1 BR apart.
Yeah, that was the kind of the good times for the Jumbos.
Yeah, I don't think the 76 is enough to warrant such an up tier.
No, I mean it's you get in the grand scheme of things, you get a little bit more firepower than a standard Jumbo, and you gain you sit at the same tier as
new tier
Jagdpanthers. Yeah, you're at the same thing as a Tiger 2P, Jagdpanthers. You're barely below the flooded 6.7 market of every single German tank under the sun. Yeah, you're not having a good time.
Yeah, despite that, it is still very capable.
Oh, for sure.
But I think it's less so than a Jumbo.
Yeah, I would feel much safer in a short 75 Jumbo than a long 76 Jumbo in any match.
Okay, moving on. M4A5. Now we're on the Ram. The Canadian, I think, variant. This one's pretty good. It's got the 6-pounder on it. It's about as mobile. It's got real wonky armor.
It does.
Anyone who's played this or has fought against it for a lot of time will know that shooting at the front of that thing is basically like playing Russian roulette, and you don't know if you're going to pen that thing or not, and there's really no good place to shoot it. So it ends up being deceptively well armored and pretty well armed too, because that 6-pounder can fire real fast. So
yeah,
I think it's probably, what do you think?
It's quite an interesting one. It performs in terms of mobility exactly like a Sherman would at the same BR. So not incredibly quick, but also pretty damn mobile. It's got the machine gun turret at the front, which can act as a shock trap for, APHE, heat, high explosive, whatever, and that crew member is expendable. Sorry, Canuck. But yeah, it's if you've ever looked at the front plate of those things, it's all cast rounding, it's all sloped in some manner. And I believe its thickness is, I mean, it's listed as 76 millimeters, I believe. I'm not sure if it is across the board, but there are definitely spots of that part that are just, a Stug will come around the corner thinking he has you, fire, and it will just bounce off completely harmlessly, and you just
that thing will bounce
annihilate
back
him.
40s all day, even on the mount. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's a tank that you shouldn't rely on the armor on, but you can, and you will get away with it more often than you should.
So I kind of want to put this in
the 6-pounder.
I
would say so. Yeah, the 6-pounder does offer.
It's at a 3.7 BR. We forgot to mention that. So it's a pretty low BR for a really It's almost an M4A2 at a lower BR. So
pretty much, yeah. You lose the APHE, but what you gain is rate of fire and a bit more penetration if you ignore the APCR.
So yeah, that's quite good. Next up on the list, back to the Stuarts, the M5A1, kind of the last light tank. Sits at a BR of 2.7. I think it's a real nice little light tank. It's fast, but it is getting a bit long in the tooth at 2.7.
Yeah,
so...
I mean, historically and kind of in-game, it is stretching the bounds of what you can use a Stuart for. It's a very good Stuart, and at its BR, it can be incredibly dangerous. But at the end of the day, it is still just the Stuart with a slightly better front plate.
Yeah, it's
really.
got that better
and better ammo.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's got the sap shell. It's got a better front plate, but it does pay for it by being a pretty high BR. And at 2.7, there's a lot more options that are opening up for you in the US. So yeah, it is one of the only light tanks that have scouting. I phrased that wrong. It's the only Stuart with scouting, I think. So in that regard, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd say it's in the same way that moving from the I'll just call it the M2 Stuart for differentiation. Moving from the M2 Stuart to the M3 Stuart, it's like you get slightly more tank, but a slightly BR. This is quite a bit more tank on a Stuart platform, but you're also at quite a bit of a higher BR. So you're not necessarily getting better per BR. It's just staying kind of equally good.
Yeah, I still don't think it's quite bad though, so I'll put it.
It's not. It's absolutely capable.
Okay, moving on from
this is the M6.
Stuart, the M6A1, kind of the original first US heavy tank. Well, it still is, but the M6A1, 5.0 BR. I'm not sure if it always did, but in the latest patch at least, it has really bad reverse speed, which I think it used to have a good one.
I believe so.
So this tank, first kind of real US heavy tank that you'll get, it's got the 76mm gun and a coaxial 37, which is not terribly useful, but I have gotten kills with it before. Its armor, while it can be bad, you'll also bounce things in really weird scenarios. So it's both well armored and very poorly armored.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I mean, from my days of fighting these things and playing as these things, specifically back in the 4.7 days, I'd be in a, say a Mark 7 Churchill, and I would fire at the front of this thing and it would go straight through. Other times, if you're playing like the Germans or the Russians, you'd fire at it with a far better gun, and it would just get absorbed by, who knows, the market. And so, yeah, the armor on that thing, it's another one of the ones where it's not reliable, but it can work. The firepower is very good. The 76, very nice gun, very comfortable gun. The 37, as you say, it's not. You should not use it. It's obviously not your primary weapon, but there are times when you can use it to, say, bait someone out. You can fire the 37, and they think, he's fired, and then you kill them.
Or if it's like a Panzer light vehicles.
Oh yeah, sure, why not? But if there's sometimes a Panzer IV, if your first shot misses or bounces, you can put it straight through the front of his turret because it is still the good 37 ammo, I believe. So it can go through the fronts of earlier medium tank turrets if in a pinch, and snipe the gunner, buy you some time to sort yourself out. Yeah, It's a massive target, but it is very mobile. It's got a good gun, but it's not particularly well armored. It's quite a weird one to place for me. I do like it, but
I think maybe C tier is fine just because the reverse is kind of poor. So
yeah, it's worse than that. It's worse now than
kind
it
of like
was.
a bargain bin M4A276 at a slightly lower
Yeah.
BR. So I think C is probably fine for it. Next up, we have the Mutant M6. The M6, let me get this right. M6A2E1 at a BR of 6.7. It's got the 105mm high velocity cannon, the same one as the T29, at its old BR. And it's got an extra front plate on it and kind of an entirely new turret. So this one's a real weird one for me. So it's got incredible firepower, and its armor can be good. It's hard to tell like what it can bounce exactly. Sometimes you'll bounce like 88s, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll bounce an IS-2, sometimes you won't. It's kind of inconsistent like that. So this is, I think, one of the more difficult ones to kind of get a feel for. Do you have any thoughts on it?
I mean, first of all, I just have to say that I love the damn thing. It's so incredibly stupid. It just it fits its nickname of the mutant. But yeah, it's kind of more of the same.
It's a lot of peaks and valleys. Like the good parts are really good, but the bad parts are real bad.
Yeah, it's very similar to the M6 and the T1 in the fact that its armor is. I think its armor is more reliable than either of the two I just mentioned,
Yeah,
but it's still not something you should be relying on. And you are the biggest target. Like
oh yeah.
Like
I mean, people can't help themselves but shoot at this thing because it's so stupid looking.
You will. It's like you can see it from the other spawn. If there's a clear line of sight, you will notice it. It's just that big. It draws fire, and it's not necessarily well armored enough to do that.
Yeah. I think probably B then. And I hate putting like tanks at B because they have like really good and really bad, but like the goods are really good, but there's so many downsides associated with it. It's kind of hard to give it much higher.
Yeah, I'd agree. As much as I'd love to put it higher, I do think it's not quite that. Should we move on to the T1E1?
Yeah, let's just get that out of the way while we're here.
Left a bit. It's next to the T14.
There it is. T1E1 recently added same BR as the M6A1, but it has a reverse gear pretty much. So yeah, I think maybe put this.
Yeah,
it's better.
You can get out of situations better if you need to. It's basically what the old M6 used to be. It's that they put it in again.
Yeah, I know it's almost at 40 minutes, so I'm gonna try and speed this up a bit.
Go for it.
Okay, M8 Scott is next. The M8 HMC. The problems that I had with the LVT with this thing, pretty much gone because it's so quick and maneuverable. You can really, I mean, you can swing the whole turret around to kind of alleviate a lot of the problems with the turret traverse. And it's small, so you can hide it. So I think it's, pretty good. Even so, I still don't use it a whole lot, and the gun is kind of hard to reliably get kills with. So I'm thinking maybe a C tier. Unless you think it's worthy of maybe.
It really depends on your playstyle. If you can make use of a fast, like sneaky, like flanking / ambush tank, then it can be incredibly good. But if you're just playing it like a normal tank, I mean, it's exactly what it looks like. I'd say high C, low B. I'd leave it to you.
We'll put it at high C simply because that 75 is kind of hard to make work reliably. The heat round. M8 LAC. One of my favorite tanks in the game. I think this is definitely an easy S tier right off the bat. It's fast, it's got a stabilized 37, and it's got a 50 cal. And at a tier where most tanks don't have armor anyways, your own lack of armor isn't really much of a hindrance. It's at 1.0, by the way. Which is obnoxiously overpowered.
Yeah, I mean, the only real downside in that regard is the open top, but to be honest, I mean, even the tanks with armored tops don't necessarily have enough armor to stop plain bullets anyway.
And so it's kind of a small open top, so you're a little more.
It's very small, yeah. I can't really disagree. It's a good little armored car.
Next up, M8A1 GMC. This is a great tank. This is like a baby Hellcat.
Yeah.
It's the Stuart. It's got the slow turret traverse, but its gun is like so much better. So any of the problems that you might have had with the M8 in ambushing, pretty much gone with this. It's a Sherman gun on a Stuart, so I think
Yeah.
A tier, pretty easy.
It's a baby Hellcat hull with a baby M10 turret. It's very good.
Speaking of the M10, that is the next thing. I like the M10. I think its 3-inch gun is really good, even if the turret traverse is kind of bad.
You can make. I mean, you have to remember it's a tank destroyer. You're not supposed to use it like a Sherman. Like its armor is, while thin, hilariously trolly. The amount of times I've had Panzer IVs like just bounce off the mantlet, which is only 38 millimeters, and that gun where it's a it's the 76 that everyone knows and loves, but it's at what 3.7, even 3.3 even. There you go. So yeah, it's mobile like a medium tank, smacks like a
heavy tank at that BR.
Yeah, at that BR, yeah.
We'll skip the AA for now. I think B is probably fine for the M10, by the way.
Sure.
M18 and the Black Cat as well. M18, real fast, no armor. Punchy gun. That's pretty much all it is. Very fast. I think A tier.
Yeah, it's great until the moment you're spotted.
Yeah, especially now that it has spotting as well.
Yeah, it's a light tank
it's
now.
It's really useful.
Yeah.
I almost want to put the Black Cat higher simply because I think it looks so much better without the muzzle brake, but for the sake of consistency, we'll put it at the same bar since it effectively changes nothing. But man, does it look better without that.
Yeah, it would be a very different list if it was a drip test.
Okay, M22 Locust. I love this thing.
Well, yeah,
Little
that
demon.
has to...
It's got the unstabilized, admittedly, 37 mil. It's one of the fastest tanks I think in the game. If you're not just counting like modern IFVs and all that garbage. So I want to put it at A tier. It's super fast. It's super tiny. You can hide this thing almost anywhere.
Yeah, I was debating S, but to be honest, yeah, the unstabilized is the only thing that holds it back from there. But obviously, it's a para tank, quote unquote. So it's yeah.
Okay, another light tank. We got the M24 Chaffee. I love the Chaffee. I've made such good use of it in the many hours I've played. I think it's just a real solid medium, middle of the bracket light tank.
It's a tank where I feel like it does far better than it has any right to. Like, you look at the stats and it's just like, well, it's fairly quick but not massively quick. It's got it more or less has the Sherman's gun. I know it's a different gun, but it performs in the same way. It has a 50 cal. It's American, we expect this. But yeah, it just always does better than you would expect it to, and it's always more of a problem for you, more of a problem for the enemy than it should be, and more of a boon to you than you'd think it would be. I've seen it perform well in games far above its BR. I have big respect for the...
It's hilarious to look at this list and see that just about every single tank has 50 cal on it.
Yeah, America.
I love it. We'll do the AA now, I guess, since we got the light tanks taken care of. M13 BR.
Is that twin 50 cal? Is it?
Twin 50 cals, yeah. It's pretty good. I mean, 250 cals is just good AA. Pretty much some of the best. Can shoot a lot. Even so, I think it's kind of a bit mildly armed.
Yeah, other nations that are roughly the same BR get like slightly better armored versions carrying 250 cals or the equivalent. I'd say like the AC. Actually, no, it's a Daimler. The
Daimler.
Whichever one has the twin 50 cals in a like the armored hull. That one's very good, and it's more or less the same BR.
Or if they have autocannons, like sometimes they're good, like the German ones are not so good, like the Bofors.
Yeah.
M15, I have been playing a lot of this recently, but I still don't think it's very good. It's got 250 cals and 37. That's real kind of sketchy.
It's got that Soviet thing of having one big caliber and two smaller calibers where the velocities are not the same.
At least it's not like asymmetrically mirrored.
Yes, it's not a MiG-15, but it's just you either aim the 50 cals or you aim the 37. You don't aim both, or you just hope for the best. but it's just
not great.
Yeah.
The M16, however, BR 2.7, is really good. I think it's probably an A tier vehicle for an AA. You could bring this
That's
thing all the way
that's
up to
fine.
like you get the M163. Simply
Yeah,
because
I
the
mean,
volume of fire of 450 cals is enormous.
yeah, 450 cows turns quickly, fairly maneuverable. Obvious downside being that,
It's a
well, I
half
mean,
track with 3
it's still a
people in
half
it.
track. Yeah, it can be killed very quickly, but I mean, that's the nature of pretty much all
If you're shooting
anti-aircraft
anything
guns.
that's not a bomber, you can fairly, reliably take it down if you're on target.
Yeah.
So, last USAA from World War II, the M19A1. I've not played a whole lot of this, but I think it's kind of middle of the road. I've seen people go on kill streaks with it, and I know its guns are a little more reliable if you actually hit the planes. I'm just not very good at aiming them.
Yeah, it's twin Bofors, is it?
More or less.
Yeah.
They're still not properly linked, but that's just a problem across all of War Thunder.
That every single AA that has like linked guns, that they just fire out sync occasionally. It's just a thing. But yeah, it's if you know how to aim those guns, they're incredibly deadly. They're just quite hard to get to grips with. And obviously, if you load the AP, you have a decent chance of dealing with tanks, at least maybe from the sides, or you can knock out the gun barrels and tracks if you want to be that sort of person. Yeah, it's like if I'm playing the British, I bring the Crusader Mark 1 AA with the Bofors. Not necessarily because it's a better AA gun, but just because the penetration of the solid shot means I can deal with tanks if I have to. It's the same kind of story with that thing.
Moving on, we'll deal with the M26s now. So let me get the proper order. Okay, so this is the standard M26, the short 90mm, 6.3 BR. I quite like this tank. I think it's, while it has its maneuverability issues, I don't think they come into play that often in the standard War Thunder map, simply because the maps aren't that big. And if you think of it more like a heavy tank, I think that maybe helps you play it a little better. The penetration of its gun, while not, it won't blow you away, but you can pen Tiger 2s from the front with it if you know how and what to shoot it with. Its armor will bounce shells. You kind of got to keep it head on. So I think it's kind of, an average Pershing, so I think B tier is probably a good place for it.
Yeah, can't argue. B tier is fine for a Pershing.
M26E1, I think this is better. It is 6.7, so it's a little bit higher BR, but it has that long 90mm gun, so it can pretty reliably punch through just about anything that's not like 250mm of flat armor, like the Jag Tiger. I think I've gone through the front of a mouse turret with those guns.
It's theoretically possible, yeah. That's 240mm, you can do that.
It keeps decent maneuverability. It's not that much heavier. So I think probably A tier is good for it.
Yeah, I don't notice any severe difference in speed, and the punch is just it's very nice.
M26 T99. This is probably also going to go much like the Calliope in C tier, because it is a premium Pershing, and there aren't really many of them. Actually, no, like normal Pershings, I mean, at 6.3. Like, if you don't want to go up to 6.7. But it has, the extra vulnerability of the rockets on the side, so I think that kind of is just a markdown on it.
Yeah, and they are far more reliably going to kill you if they explode. Like, if they explode, you die. That's kind of just it.
Yep. M36 GMC, so this is the Jackson, the first Jackson. Pretty much has a Pershing's gun on it, but it is at 5.7 BR. It's on more or less a Sherman chassis. Even so, I think it's probably A tier, because that gun is just really, really good. It can kill most things that you'll encounter, anything short of a full up tier. And if you know how to play it, you'll, bounce a couple shells, even though you are still pretty vulnerable. But ideally, you don't want to be in that position. And unlike the Wolverine, it actually has turret traverse.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think of it more or less as just the grown-up M10. It forms the same role, just at a higher BR and with slightly more comfortable turret.
M36 B2, this is, arguably not a World War II tank, but if you take away the heat shell, it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll still keep it at A, simply because it is, slightly higher, but it does get that better shell. So its protection's not improved, but its firepower is. However, I don't think, it's enough to kind of catapult it into S.
Yeah.
In the same dubiously World War II vein, the M46s, while they do have much later shells, I like to think of them as, the proper M26 if it didn't have an awful engine on it. So it's a fast Pershing, basically, and if you want to, if you like to play it like that, as I do, and not just sit and spam heat shells all day, it's quite fun to kind of see what the Pershing could have been if it had a less troubled development. So
are they
thinking
7.0?
maybe put these in A as well.
Is it 7.0 still?
They're both 7.0, yeah.
Okay, yeah. It fits the medium role a lot better than the Pershing does. For the small increase in BR, you become much more like a medium.
Mm-hmm. And it's built like, the Pershing. That's kind of why I consider it there. It's not like an M47, which is basically an entirely new tank. Not entirely, but close enough. What the hell's this? Oh, it's a Stuart 6. This is just an M5 Stuart, so...
Where have you put that?
I think I put it in... put it in this tier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the one.
Super Hellcat. This is a really good tank. This is the Hellcat with a much better gun. Sits at a BR of 6.3, but you do get the Pershing's gun on a super mobile chassis.
Yeah,
so there's not much more to say about it other than, it's a lot easier to secure kills, and not like the Hellcat was surviving anything anyway. So
yeah, I feel like it's not much of a BR increase for the amount of firepower you get, considering the Hellcat is so agile that, you
just don't want to be getting shot at anyway. T14, I love this thing. BR-47, very well armored, even if the armor scheme of the turret's kind of weird with the better armored sides and weakly armored, albeit sloped front.
I'd give it a clean A.
Yeah, it's got APCR rounds. It's at 4.7, so you can very comfortably take it with the M4A176.
Yeah, the only real weak spot, quote unquote, is the front turret is only 76 because it is basically just a Sherman turret at the front.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only downside to it. The front of the hull, very well sloped. I mean, it's only 50 millimeters, but it's very well sloped. The machine gun weak spot kind of isn't really a weak spot anymore because of volumetric. The side armor is what, 101 millimeters, I believe,
yeah,
roughly.
Yeah, it's real janky.
It is very hard to find a clean spot to penetrate. You're not really going to go through the side of the turret. You're probably not going to go through the side of the hull either, unless you're using a Panzer IV type gun or similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say it's a very good assault tank. Very good.
Okay, next up, T18E2, the Boarhound, thing that my channel is themed after, because I love it. I don't have it. It's the only premium I don't have. I think this tank is incredibly good. It's a little kind of questionably mobile off-road, but on roads it's super fast, and it's got the 57mm M1, which is basically a 6-pounder with HE filler.
Yeah, and I believe it's the Mark V. It's based on the Mark V rather than the Mark III 6-pounder, so you get even more penetration.
Yeah, it's better pen than the Sherman 75. So
for sure.
You're actually deadlier in the right hands. Its armor is kind of meh, but you'll bounce like a 37 maybe. It's at 3.0 BR, so you're not facing super crazy stuff too often, and you can pretty much kill anything that's a threat to you before it can kill you.
And because of, you'd be surprised how many shots to the side they can absorb with tires. It's not just that vehicle, but any wheeled vehicle. If the shell lands low and hits the tire, it's a lot of spaced armor. It can absorb quite a lot of shells, and because that one has 8 wheels, more area covered by wheel, better protection.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up, T20. This thing is very unfortunate. It's basically a Sherman that can reverse. Its front armor is, I think, probably worse. It's got that gigantic, box where the hull machine gun comes out, and its mantlet's not too great either. And at 6.0 BR, that's a real hard sell. So I almost want to put it in C. I love the tank, but God, it feels awful to bring out.
Yeah, I mean... I don't know, I always think of it like bringing out, say, a Crusader Mark III if it didn't have a stabilizer. Which is just, sure, you're quite mobile, but you're not very well armored. And while your gun's good, because you're so fast, unless you're ambushing things, you're never really going to get it on target.
Yeah, it's a
It's a shame
Sherman
it's
with a
not one
lot
of
of
the
downsides on it, and at far too high a BR, unfortunately.
yeah. It's a shame it's not one of its like slightly more developed test beds.
Yeah.
It could have been something like
Next,
the T21.
the next tank of the T25 suffers a lot of the same issues. I think it's a baby Pershing, but it's at 6'3", and it doesn't have like any of the upsides, like kind of like the weird front plate that kind of makes it hard to pen. So I think this thing probably needs a down tier, and it would be a lot better. But until then, I think it's probably still only C tier. I don't like bringing it out.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point of a baby Pershing at the same BR as the Pershing?
None
The whole
really.
point of it being baby is that it should be a bit lower.
Next up, Super Pershing T26E1-1. Really good gun, really good armor, but it is kind of slow. Slower than the M26E1. So I'm thinking a B tier.
I would, yeah, okay. I'd say a high B. I mean, personal taste, of course.
I mean, I love the tank, but I'm just trying to think, objectively.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my playstyle is a bit more armor focused than, and I just like the kind of, I guess, extra feeling of safety when playing it. I don't know. You feel like you should be a bit more confident poking that ridge because there's a chance you will live.
Yeah, I mean, there is a chance. Don't get me wrong, but it's
yeah,
for a tank that already struggled with weight problems.
Yeah,
adding a long 90 and a bunch of extra armor does it no favors. Even if
for
it
sure,
does,
you're not
give you a big return on investment.
It's a pure trade of armor and firepower for speed. It entirely depends if you think that's worth it. I personally do, but yeah, I can see why it's in B.
In the same vein, we have the Jumbo Pershing, which is the M26E5. It's got a lot thicker armor on the front, but it does keep the short 90, and at 6'7", it's basically a jumbo. So it's hard to kill, but it'll have a difficult time killing you if you're sufficiently armored.
Yeah, I mean, at 6'7", there are a lot of beefy tanks it has to deal with, and I don't know. I've enjoyed playing it, but you do feel it's kind of weird. You feel like you're a bigger tank than you are because the armor and this, like, it's relatively mobile for the amount of armor it brings.
It just needs a
and
little
the amount
extra
of armor
punch.
It brings is great.
At 6'3", it was really good. I think. You were slower, but you had more armor. So, I think that was fair. But at 6'7",
yeah,
you lose a lot. T28. So this is the baby Doom Turtle. We'll talk about the Doom Turtle at the same time as well.
I mean, anything you say about one more or less goes through to the other.
Yeah, I mean, what is there to say? It is impenetrable from the front. It's got that long 105 that can kill pretty much anything, but it is slow as anything. God awfully slow.
It's the tank triangle, except they forgot the third corner.
It can turn on a dime, which is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, it is. It's very it can rotate very well. That's the only type of agility it has. It's something you put somewhere you don't want the enemy to be. You sit it at the end of a road and they can't push it. That's pretty much it, really. Yeah.
So I think probably the T95 is maybe C tier. It's great at what it does, but what it does is so niche.
I would almost say the T28 should go to B just because of the lower BR.
But it has like such less armor on it. On the sides.
No, the front. Oh well, the sides certainly, but it's function. I mean, if somebody's on your side in the T95, you're probably dead anyway. At that BR, it's. I don't know.
Would you accept like a high C? Because I don't know.
I feel like it's basically it's functionally identical except at a lower BR.
America doesn't do good with casemates.
Yeah. Is that the
T30? We'll actually just dispute that instantaneously and talk about the T55, which is I think one of the best tank destroyers. It's like the Pac Puma, but a little less scummy because it's a little less capable.
I was gonna say it's the Pac Puma at home.
It's 4.3 BR, so it is lower. But it's horizontal traverses, I think, a lot worse. So it's got a 3-inch gun at 4.3, and it's super mobile, but it's also super vulnerable.
Yeah, I
Even
think
so, I
that's
think
fair.
in the right hands, it's one of the most capable sort of platforms of that style. So I think A tier is probably an appropriate place for it.
That's fine.
Okay, we're on the home stretch now. T-29. This is my personal favorite tank of all time. It sits at a BR of 7.0. For a very long time, it used to be 6.7. It was super good there, but I don't think it was like overpowered. Because it was a lot easier to kill before volumetric, so maybe that's, you know, kind of feeds into it. I said easier to kill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's got a long 105 with APHE. Even at 7.0, I still think it's an S tier tank. It's fast. It's very well armored. It has admittedly suffered since, you know, the power creep of vehicles at, you know, between 7.0 and 8.0. A lot more A2GMs and heat rounds. So even so, I think, you know, for what it is, it's probably one of the best things, and it's a premium. So, you know, you can grind out a lot with it. So I think S tier. Maybe that's
Yeah,
a bit biased.
I mean, maybe, but I mean, I find it hard to argue. I mean, back when this thing was the same BR as Tiger 2s, you'd see Tiger 2s just sitting there plinking the
Oh, they'd
turret, doing
melt.
absolutely nothing, and then you just delete
Their
them through
knees
the
would
front.
give out under them.
It
It's
even
hilarious.
and the one redeeming factor of the thing going to 7.0 is the fact that between 6.7 and 7.7, and I guess 7.0 to 8.0, there's more of a trend to losing armor than gaining armor. Aside from the big Russians and like the Conqueror and the M103, most tanks didn't really. They either didn't gain armor or they lost a lot of armor. So if you see a Leopard in it and you're in a, you know, you're in a T29, you can kill him just as easily as you would anything else. It's very satisfying to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, luckily tanks didn't really get that much more protected, so it can do all right there as well. I think yes, it's fair.
T30 is up next, which is, you know, another cousin of it. It's got the 155mm howitzer on it. It has an APHE, an AP. No, I think it has an APHE. It has an HE shell. I think it does have actually a solid AP as well, but I never use it.
Yeah, there's no reason
This
to.
tank's it's got a real long reload, and its shells can be kind of finicky, so I'm thinking maybe a B tier. Well armored and mobile as it is, its gun isn't quite the dedicated tank killer that its cousins are.
Yeah, it has everything that's good about the T29, but the gun is just, you know,
It lets
longer
it down a
reload,
little.
harder to aim, hasn't got quite as much pen, and sure that especially with like the HE round can do can knock out
overpressure a
crews
lot.
externally. Yeah, it overpressures a lot, but really anything you're going to overpressure with that, you probably could have killed with the 105. So yeah, just
okay. Last
same
one
but
of the
worse.
series, then the T34. I think this is probably A tier, maybe quite a high A tier.
Yeah,
it's got a 120 with solid shot only, but it can pen most things, and the shrapneling is very good. So you'll usually end up killing, if not in one shot, then usually two. Yeah, it's basically a T29 at 6.7 with solid shot only.
Yeah, I mean, the comparison between those two guns is kind of like the 75 to the 6-pounder, and the fact that one has APHE and a bit less pen, but the other one has, you know, a bit more pen, but no APHE. But you know, it being 6.7 compared to the T29 7.0 is probably the saving grace of that tank. Otherwise, I would take the T29 over a T34 just because the APHE is more reliable, even if it has less pen. You're going to go for everything anyway.
Yep. Last two tanks, T32 and T32E1. These are very unfortunate tanks, simply and solely because of their BR. One is at 7.3 and one is at 7.7. To this day, I don't know why they're so high. They're just essentially Pershing hulls that are slightly better armored and with a slightly better gun and mantlet. Why that necessitates moving them up to 7.3 and 7.7, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I almost want to put them in C tier, which is really unfortunate because they're very capable tanks, but they're just let down by their BR so much.
If I remember as well, the only real difference, like noticeable difference between the two that means the point, you know, for BR change is the fact that the hull machine gun is present on one and not the other.
Yeah, the E1 removes it and bumps it up to 7.7 because of it.
Yeah,
because
which I
you
feel
know
like
fighting 8-7 with a veritable World War II tank is super fair.
Yeah, I mean, considering the other tanks, like the other heavy tanks, are at 7.7. We're talking, oh, it's 7.3 is the IS-3. You get the T-10A at 7.7. You get the Conqueror at 7.7. You get the M103 at 7.7. All of which are just far better at being heavy tanks than you are.
Mm-hmm.
They're all stabilized. Well, actually, I don't
Well,
know
the
about the
Conqueror is
M103.
stabilized. The M103's got like the ginormous gun with the like insane
Yeah.
shell. The
The
T10s are
T-10A
just
is
obnoxious.
stabilized. Yeah. Yeah, the IS-4, while it's not stabilized, it's just incredibly well protected. Like, it's practically impossible to go through it without like specialized
Yeah,
rounds
I
or
just
just
think
a
that
really good
this
shot.
thing, like, it's powerful, sure, but it's got lots of downsides, and I
Hmm.
think it's just too high. So
Yeah,
unfortunately,
it's
I just rate them lower.
yeah.
All right, well, that is our list of U.S. tanks. Took quite a while, but it is quite a stuffed tree. Any closing thoughts on it? Kind of the U.S. World War II as a whole.
Well, yeah. I mean, the US tree in War Thunder is very much it's a comfortable tree to play because almost all the tanks can do pretty much almost anything.
They all
If you need to
play
put
more or less the same too, kind of at a high level.
yeah. Yeah, in the overarching strategy, you play them in the same way. They can attack, they can defend, they can kind of snipe, they can do everything you need them to. Not necessarily better than any other nation in one topic, but kind of as a general like tank existence. You can always rely on an American tank.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in, and if we do more of them, give a like, and maybe we will go do the British, German, Soviet, any some of the minor ones maybe. But yeah, thanks for watching.